part of the world and bringing to people here and elsewhere events, particularly from an Arab perspective. I know here that people have been anticipating this. There's been a lot in the press and a lot on the streets because it seemed that there was momentum building for an American attack. The question here, I think, is how people will react to it. The government has done everything it can to lay the groundwork to convince people here that the American attempt to hunt down bin Laden is justified. But when you go to certain parts of this country, particularly up in the town of Peshawar, near the Afghan border, it's a town of some 2 million people. Half the population is Afghan refugees who have come across during the past 20 years or so. There is a very strong pro-Taliban sentiment there. There are a lot of people who just cannot believe that Osama bin Laden and his network are responsible for this. Those are people who perhaps would never be convinced by any evidence presented to them. But I think the Pakistani government is going to have a job of trying to essentially sell the evidence that has convinced them to the people. They were hoping that there would be more of a public discussion, a public disclosure of the evidence of the case against bin Laden and his associates, particularly up there where, again, there have been protests. There may be more protests. The government has been on alert. There have been also a lot of troop movements in that area, and perhaps importantly as well, the government has kept that border area sealed now for the better part of the month since we have been here. Were concerned about Taliban sympathizers coming across with refugees. They've also been very concerned about weapons coming across and perhaps an uprising in this area. Tom, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Ron Allen. We expect to hear from the president now at 1 Eastern time. That's about 1 minute and 30 seconds away. Let's go briefly to NBC's David Gregory, who is at the White House. David?
Far from Ari Fleischer, the president's spokesman, who said succinctly, we have begun another front in this war on terrorism. The president will speak, as you mentioned, and to follow on Tim Russer's point from earlier, administration officials have said that a lot of supporters in this campaign have appreciated the U.S. restraint. It's been a major point to get across to the American people and the rest of the world as to why the United States has waited this long before this additional front against terrorism has begun. Tom?
Briefly, David, before we do hear from the president, should we expect any surprises in his speech on the diplomatic or political front?
Not that we're aware of, Tom, and we're also not expecting a lot of detail about the military operations now underway.
All right, thank you very much, NBC David Gregory. So to bring you quickly up to date, it's now coming up on 1 o'clock Eastern time in Afghanistan because of the time differences. It is 9:30 there, and a major attack is underway by U.S. military forces. We're about to get the details on all of that from the President of the United States, who returned from Camp David earlier. He'll be addressing the nation from the Oval Office in his capacity as the chief executive of this country, but also as the commander-in-chief of all U.S. armed forces. And as we have been saying, he is also expected to talk